I didn't really get the fulfillment of this sort of career success that I was anticipating. So I kind of decided to just give it all up and started traveling.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com. Happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Travel Podcast. I'm Erik Paquette. AJ is out this week, but not to worry, we've got a great show for you. In just a few minutes, I'll be chatting with Jasper Ribbers of GetPaidForYourPad.com. We're going to be talking about how you can make money as an Airbnb host renting out your place while you travel, and also how you can search Airbnb as a traveler to find great hosts and negotiate better pricing for your travels. One of our top priorities with Abroaders has always been to showcase opportunities to earn location-independent income. And while it might seem obvious that you can make money renting on Airbnb, the magnitude of this opportunity was not at all on my radar. And so considering our plans to rent a place long-term in Rio de Janeiro, the conversation that I had with Jasper this week completely blew me away. So Jasper is renting one apartment. It's his place in Amsterdam. This is not a portfolio of properties or a business around Airbnb rentals. And his annual Airbnb income is in the low six figures on just that one apartment. So we're going to dive into that in just a few minutes and hopefully open up some big opportunities for you guys to potentially do the same and rent your place while traveling the world. Before we get to the interview, I want to make one correction from last week's show. We covered the Star Alliance and highlighted some of the best earning and redemption opportunities. And when we talked about transferable currencies that could be moved to Star Alliance programs, we mentioned Chase Ultimate Rewards, but only covered United as their Star Alliance transfer partner. In that, we failed to mention Singapore Airlines, which was added as a Chase Ultimate Rewards partner back in May. So Singapore has some great redemption opportunities, and you should definitely take a look at those if you have Chase Ultimate Reward points and are looking to book on any of the Star Alliance airlines. You may want to consider moving those points to Singapore instead of United. At the very least, do a price check and take a look at which program would offer the best deal for your travel plans. I also wanted to share a tip with you guys to cut a lot of the hassle and potentially a decent amount of the cost of international data and cell phone usage. So I've been a long-time Verizon Wireless customer in the US. Their network is really strong here, but they charge exorbitant prices for their international texting and international data plans. So I have recently moved my account over to T-Mobile and taken advantage of a relatively new offer where they are willing to pay your early termination fee with another carrier. So I wanted to cover a couple of items. I'm still in this process, so I will be reporting on this in future episodes as well. But the basic deal is that you must move your old phone number from another carrier to T-Mobile. You need to trade in a phone in order to get your early termination fee reimbursed, and you do have to buy a phone from them. The cheapest phone is about $72. So in my case, my early termination fee with Verizon is $230. I'll be trading in an old phone. You can buy a cheap one on Craigslist, or I happen to have one laying around. So I'll be trading that in and buying a $72 phone in exchange for getting a debit card with $230 to reimburse me for the early termination with Verizon. One other thing that you should be aware of, it looks like T-Mobile may be doing a hard credit pull to verify your eligibility for a new account. So I'm going to be checking my credit report very soon to see if that was indeed a hard pull or just doing a soft pull to verify my identity. There are some conflicting accounts on the internet about what is happening with the T-Mobile pull. But the bottom line here is that if you are in a contract with AT&T or Verizon and are having to mess with switching out SIM cards every time you change countries, I've probably got, a baggie full of 15 or 20 different SIM cards that I've used over the past couple of years traveling. So I'm very much looking forward to trying out this T-Mobile service where I'll be able to hit the ground and just switch on my phone and get free international data at 3G speeds. So we'll be reporting back on how that goes. For now, let's get into the interview. All right, Jasper. So you left a kind of cozy traditional job to pursue some entrepreneurial aspirations. Tell me a little bit about your story, how you got into Airbnb and entrepreneurship.
At first, I thought I was going to just get a job like after a year, but then I kind of figured like, wow, I really love traveling, so I wanted to find a way to make money so that I could just keep traveling. And initially, I just started like a bunch of like online businesses. I literally just Googled how to make money online, tried all sorts of like different projects. Most of them weren't very successful, but some of them were. So I managed to make some money. But then I was renting out my apartment on long term, and it didn't really make much money. And I also didn't like that I couldn't stay in my own place when I wanted to. Mm-hmm. So then I heard of Airbnb like 2 years ago and decided to give it a try. And it was just a huge success from the beginning. Within a few months, I was making like 2.5 times what I used to make. I really sort of dived into it and tried to figure out how to really maximize the revenue from my listing. Mm-hmm. And it got to the point where I was making so much money off it that I didn't really need to do anything else.
Great spot to be in, man.
So that's when I actually closed, most of the other shit I was doing. And then I decided to write a book about it. Got a guy to partner with me on it because I'm not a native English speaker and I didn't really have much writing experiences other than I do write for a travel blog as well. It's called The Traveling Dutchman. But I figured to really like create like an awesome book, I needed to get somebody on board. So I got my buddy Jose on board and we kind of wrote it together.
Very cool. Tell me a little bit about how the marketing kind of moved up for you and how you were able to maximize with the properties. Did you start out just with your one place and start trying to bring on other locations, or kind of what was the progression?
I'm still doing just one place. It's my apartment back in Amsterdam. When I started, I realized that the first thing that you need to do is to build a reputation, because Airbnb is really a reputation build platform. Mm-hmm. Right. So the way that people will find your listing is by going to the Airbnb website and, filling in like the city that you're in and just press the search button, and Airbnb will decide which listings will show up on the top. Mm-hmm. And to give you an example, like in Amsterdam, it's like there's 5,000 properties. So
wow,
you need to do a good job for you to show up on the top. It's kind of like Google. Mm-hmm. And in Google how important it is to be on the first page, but all the other pages. So once I realized that, I just sort of like did some research and figured out what Airbnb looks at, what do they use to determine these search rankings, and then I just focused on like sort of hitting all those points until I got to the top, and that's when my inquiries and bookings exploded.
Very cool, very cool. So were you kind of figuring this out by trial and error with your property at the time you were working on the book? Or tell me a little bit more about that project. Obviously, you're now helping other people to sort of replicate those results. Yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
No, so I started writing the book 6 months ago. And at that time, I was already hosting for like a year and a half. But really what triggered me to start writing it was that I was just so amazed by how much money I was making off my apartments, and just the idea that I could just travel the world and supporting myself just with my apartments was just kind of mind blowing, Mm-hmm. So I just felt like, hey, I want to tell people about this because I don't think people are aware of this opportunity, right, that exists.
Yeah.
And the second thing was I looked at other listings, and I actually use Airbnb when I travel a lot as well. So I've seen a lot of other places, and it just struck me that like so many people are not doing everything they can to sort of create the best guest experience and really like optimize their revenue. I was just thinking like people are losing out so much money, they can do such a better job. So those were really the two sort of reasons that I decided to write this book.
Makes a lot of sense. I know we've certainly had a mixed bag with Airbnb. I think AJ and I are probably getting better at sorting through and finding the places that are going to be ideal hosts. So that's something I want to talk with you a little bit about as well.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, making the experience seamless for the guests is huge. I would imagine from the host perspective to be able to get that credibility on Airbnb and the, sort of the ranking that you need. You said you were traveling and also renting your place out back home. How did you manage the logistics of taking care of getting guests in and out while you were also trying to prioritize traveling for yourself?
I have a cleaning lady back in Amsterdam who I know for a very long time, and I really trust her. So I asked her, like, hey, do you want to help me with this listing? And I figured it would work out really well because basically she can clean the apartment and then do the check-in right after that, right? Mm-hmm. So she basically shows up a couple hours before the guests arrive, cleans the apartment, and then she checks in the guests. And then I just pay her a little bit extra for the time, and it just works out perfectly.
That's great.
Yeah, so, and other than that, I can manage the whole listing online, like Airbnb has an iPhone app. So I manage pretty much everything on my phone. The only thing I do on the actual platform, like on my desktop, is like writing some messages and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. But it's nice to be able to connect from just your phone. It's a really huge value add. Even, the biggest hotel chains don't really have very good online booking functionality from a mobile phone. I think it's getting better, but that's one of the big advantages to me with Airbnb is when AJ and I were in Berlin, we were literally, looking for stuff while we were on the train headed there. Yeah. And, we're able to lock up a place without, even having to get a laptop out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, this is the cool thing about Airbnb. They're always looking to implement new things, and they're very sort of, modern kind of thing. Like they've only existed for a few years, obviously, but they're really trying to do everything to make the user experience as good as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So the place you're renting is in Amsterdam, is that right?
Yeah.
Very cool. I imagine, with, you said 5,000 other listings that, can be both very competitive, but also, it's a huge travel destination, a place where a lot of people are looking for places. And, I think we're actually looking at Amsterdam possibly this fall as well. I'm sure you have a lot of information about pricing and sort of the details of the listing. Can you kind of go into that specifically for your place and how you were able to make it stand out amongst all the other options?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I basically looked at all the factors that Airbnb uses to determine like sort of a search ranking. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is, the reviews are really, really important, right? So I also focused on just creating the best guest experience as possible. And that's the cool thing about Airbnb. Like, yeah, it's cool to make more money, but by making more money, you have to improve the experience of your guests, right? Mm-hmm. So by teaching hosts how to make more money, you're also teaching them how to create better guest experiences, which is really in the benefit of everyone. I can give you a few points. How do you create a good guest experience?
Great.
Well, it starts with the communication before the guest arrives, because the main concern of any traveler is that showing up at somebody's house and that person not being there, or the door being closed, or that person not like taking care of you when there's any issues, because that's really what you're guaranteed to have when you're booking a hotel. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I do is I communicate a lot with my guests before they arrive in my apartment. I send them a guidebook. I send them several emails. I send them like 5 different ways how they can contact me. I really reassure them that like I'm taking my responsibility as a host serious, and I'm going to make sure that my guests, is going to be welcomed by someone. And if there are any issues at all, like, I'm going to make sure they're okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you actually handle a lot of that yourself still, or is part of that what you delegate to your person that helps check in the guests themselves?
I do the communication myself, although I do have a virtual assistant who helps me with that. But the management, as far as their communication, I keep that in my own hands because it's just really important. When the guest arrives at your place and you've made the guest feel comfortable before arrival, then I think that's half the battle won already.
Sure. So how long did it take you before you were sort of comfortable with being able to travel? I mean, I imagine it takes time to establish that trust, get the references, get the verifications and reviews. How long did it take you to really get kind of momentum with your place to a point where you could really leave and just let the accommodation requests come into you?
I'd say it probably took about 6 months before I was really up to speed. But that's because I didn't really know how to do it at first, right? Mm-hmm. Like I literally just created a listing and then slowly started like making improvements. And, I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. And that's another reason why I thought this book would be really useful for people, because They can literally just take the book and implement everything that's in there and then just, kind of start off in an optimal way from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it took about 6 months or so before I reached a level where I was able to support myself just off my apartment. I'm getting like almost 100% occupancy. I've raised the prices several times because, people are just willing to pay it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think you can really, like I say, 2 to 3 months, you can get pretty far, in just a few months' time if you really like give it everything you got from the beginning.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to approach things, and I think often people kind of try and chip away and end up not really making a lot of progress. So I think if you have access to a resource where somebody really has sort of hacked the system and figured out how to optimize a listing, that seems like a huge value to me. Can you give a little bit more detail about what's in the book? I mean, what can people expect to find? I know you kind of sent over a list that includes some really common things like dealing with unhappy guests, how to prepare your house, how to set your prices. I think that would be, extremely interesting. Can you kind of just run through a little bit of how the book's broken down and how you help with those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the idea behind the book is that we cover everything that's involved in running your Airbnb listing. So it starts with preparing your house, right? Because when you live in a house, you need a different setup than when you're just traveling and you're a guest, right?
Yeah.
Quick pointers. You don't want to have too much personal stuff lying around. You want your house to be sort of nice and tidy and gives people a sense of like space, when there's not too much stuff around. You probably want to add like some amenities, like, make sure your people can make coffee, like tea, like, maybe like a toaster or a mixer or something. Make sure there's plenty of towels. Make sure there's plenty of like comfortable pillows. The most important thing that people are looking for when staying somewhere is like a good night of sleep, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So make sure you have like a comfortable bed, comfortable mattress, some nice pillows, and don't economize on those things. Get those extra pillows, get those extra sheets, make sure they're like nice sheets as well. It's a small investment, but it'll go a long way in creating that guest experience. The best thing to do this really is to just walk into your house and pretend that you're a traveler. Pretend that you're staying at this place and you've never been there before, and just walk into the door and look around and think about like, hey, I just flew in from the other side of the world. I haven't slept in like 24 hours, I haven't showered. Like, what do you want to do, right?
Yeah.
And then just walk through the house and look at it from that perspective. And that will probably give you like tons of insight. But I also, in the chapter, we list like so many things that could be useful. So you can literally just go through our list and check all the items and stuff. So that's preparing your house. That's kind of the first step. Then I talk a lot about communication, how to communicate with your guests. Because like I said, it's really important. And if you get that right, like you're already halfway through like getting awesome reviews. Because if you show a guest that you are doing everything you can to make his experience as good as possible, then if there's any minor issues, they're not going to complain about it. You see what I mean?
Yeah, you have absolutely. I know that, we've been in that spot many times where maybe something wasn't totally ideal, but the hosts went out of their way to make us comfortable, made themselves available. And, it's certainly easy to overlook, a minor inconvenience if the person's responsive versus if they're, just hard to get a hold of. And then you just either want to get your money back or want to make sure that somebody else doesn't fall into that same situation. So you write a bad review.
I mean, it's, things happen, right? And not everything is in your control. You know what I mean? Like, I had a guest, for example, who told me that they kind of lost one night of sleep because there was a bunch of people making noise outside on the street, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously, I can't really do anything about that. But then, like, because they knew that, like, I'm literally doing everything I can to make sure they're having an awesome time, they didn't even mention it in the review. They just told me in private.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So creating that relationship with your guests is just really important. And then some other important things are, like, one of the biggest mistakes that people make is the pricing. The pricing is a really, really important aspect of your listing. I have a chapter on pricing in the book where I really go into detail, and for some people it might be a little bit too mathematical. Like, I do actually have a econometrics background, so I love sort of doing math and optimizing and stuff like that. But I basically came up with a pricing system that people can implement. I have an example in the book so that those who don't really want to read too much about math, they can just kind of just copy paste it. Mm-hmm. But it comes down to starting with a higher price, like long before the check-in date, and then gradually lowering it as you're getting tourists check-in, and then really lower it down like to the absolute bare minimum in like the last week or so. Because a house doesn't have very many like flexible costs, right? Most of the costs are fixed.
Yep.
So it doesn't really cost you much more having a person stay at your house versus having it empty. So if I can just have somebody in my house for like, let's say like $50, even though I'm charging $200 normally, I'll still do it because it's still $50. And then also I have another review, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And getting bookings and getting reviews is basically is worth money because it helps you attracting more customers in the future.
And I would imagine that Airbnb also prioritizes listings that do well. I would think that, if you're making money, they're making money. And the folks that continue to be able to attract new renters probably get a bit of a boost in the rankings as well over the people that are maybe a little less active and aren't changing prices and adapting to the market conditions to be able to kind of grab that marginal traveler that might not have a place, showing up the last couple nights.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the main thing that Airbnb looks at is how active you are, both in terms of like on the platform, but also in terms of like how many guests you get and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm not 100% sure because Airbnb doesn't disclose all the things they look at, but I'm pretty sure like pricing is a part as well. So if you price your place really low, it will show up higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. And they also, one of the big things as far as searching for a place is they do a really nice job of letting people filter. And so, if you've got a buyer that is legitimately looking for a place to stay and, you have Wi-Fi and you have a couple other things that they've got checked off that are important to them, Airbnb definitely makes it really easy to find those listings that are a match for your needs for the trip.
Yes, certainly. Now that we're talking about looking for a place from the traveler's perspective, I think you're right. And they make it really easy for you to find a good place. One thing that I really recommend to people if they're looking for a place is make a lot of inquiries. So don't just inquire with one host, And then secondly, always try to negotiate. And, this is really important because I know from my host perspective,
yep.
That, you're always trying to get sort of the maximum out of your place. But if I get a request and somebody's just going to pay what I'm asking for it, then that's perfect. But often I'll be willing to give a discount. But if people don't ask for it, then, I'm obviously not going to.
Yeah, not going to offer it. Well, and also, I think it's a trade-off with occupancy. Obviously, you'd like to get the highest rate you can, but if nobody's staying there, on a couple of days, then you're losing out on that money. And like you said, variable costs are really low with this sort of thing. So, that's something I certainly have to get better at is sort of coming up with a templated email to send out to a bunch of Airbnb hosts and, try and set up that negotiation and, follow through with the solid number of people. How many hosts do you think is a good number to reach out to if you're, say, coming to Amsterdam and are looking for a place on Airbnb?
Well, first of all, I think you want to think about which area you want to stay at. Mm-hmm. So that's usually what I do. And then I would say at least 5 or so, and also check out the calendars. You can see how many nights they have available in the calendar, right?
Right.
So you can kind of get an idea of how busy it is, how desperate the host will be to sort of find a guest, right?
Yeah.
And also, another thing you can do is you can go on booking.com and look at a hotel. They'll tell you what percentage of hotels are booked for your dates. So that's another way to sort of estimate the sort of demand for accommodation during your date. So that, and the more information you have, the better position you're at to negotiate.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. So essentially just check out booking.com and that'll give you an estimation of the occupancy of hotels in the area.
Yeah, exactly. It'll tell you. It'll say 50% of the rooms are booked or 80% or 20% or whatsoever.
Ah, that's great. Yeah, that's definitely a good tip because if there's a lot of space, you probably also have a similar dynamic going on with the Airbnb hosts and can probably negotiate a little harder.
Yeah, let's go online for sure.
So where can people find your book and how can they get in touch with you if they want to get more information or, start learning how to do this themselves?
We have a website. Our book is called Get Paid for Your Pad. And if you go to getpaidforyourpad.com, you can actually download the introduction, the prologue, and the first chapter of the book for free.
Very cool.
So everyone can just go ahead and do that. And then we'll also send you a 3-part training email sequence with just packed with all sorts of tips and tricks on how to be a successful host in Airbnb. So this is all for free. So I encourage everyone to check it out. If you do want to just go and buy the book, you can also go to optimizeyourairbnblisting.com. And that page will have some more information about what's in the book and like what you can expect from it, a little bit of information about me and my co-author. The book actually comes with free bonuses. I included my personal guidebook, and this is quite an important aspect of the Airbnb hosting. I created a very extensive and detailed guide of my apartment, but also of the neighborhood, and I send it out to my guests as soon as they book. So other hosts can just kind of grab it and, use it as a basis to create their own.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's always nice to have a template for that sort of thing, so you're not starting from scratch. Definitely super valuable. I know we had one Airbnb host in Munich that did that for us and was really nice. Just tons of information about where to go, where to eat, what's fun at night. So that's super cool.
Yeah, and then we added 2 other bonuses. Like one is a private Facebook group where people can basically share experiences and ask questions about Airbnb. So you get access to that as well. And we'll also be hosting a number of live sessions, probably on like Google Hangout or on GoToWebinar, where we'll be answering questions from the people who buy our book live with video as well. So
very cool. Always cool. Nice to have a little bit of extra support. Great to have a good reference tool that gives a lot of information, but I think for a lot of people it's really important to know that they can check in and ask questions. So that's very cool. Sounds like a really good model you've got going.
Yeah, I mean, our goal is really to sort of provide people with an all-encompassing like resource for, being successful in Airbnb. So we'll always reply to all the emails that we get and everything with questions, and it's cool, it's a lot of fun as well. Like I'm really passionate about Airbnb myself, so I really enjoy helping other people and helping them to be successful.
Very cool, man. Well, thank you for joining us today. I know our listeners will definitely get a lot of value out of this, and we'll post up links in the show notes to your website where they can buy the book and also get more information or sign up for those free email tips to kind of get started. Once again, this is Jasper Ribbers of getpaidforyourpad.com. So check that out. Visit the show notes. We'll have links to all his stuff. Thanks for joining us, man. Been really nice talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Erik. It was a pleasure.
This week's International Jam is a remix of Coldplay's Clocks, performed by Rhythms del Mundo. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll be back for a regularly scheduled episode this Wednesday, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Wherever you are, travel safe.
Lights go out and I can't be saved. Tides that I tried to swim against broke me down upon my knees. Oh, I beg and please, singing, come out of things unsaid.
Hey Brothers, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Erik or AJ at abroaders.com. We will see you next week.